Hello, fellow writers. My name's Laura, and welcome to Learn to Writer, the channel where we talk about the mental challenges of being a writer. Theme in stories is a very important part of them. You've probably always heard it referenced. People quote theme of books. They say it so definitively with awe, like, oh my gosh, theme. No one ever really talks about how you put theme into a book, right? They'll talk about what theme is. They'll talk about how you can tell what the theme is based on, what the characters do and say, but they don't ever give you a breakdown of where does that theme come from in the first place. So today, I'm going to lay it out step by step so you too can also write theme like a literary great. So real quick, let's first talk about what the heck is theme. Theme, with a capital T, is basically the book's purpose in the world. It's a question or a comment about the way that the world works, or doesn't, and explored within the story. It sounds grand and impressive, and when it's done properly, it actually is. Unfortunately, when it's done improperly, it can sound cringy, pedantic, or worst, preachy. If you're like me, then you probably were introduced to theme somewhere in English class around middle school age. I was assigned classics to read in English class, and then the teacher would inform me of what the theme of the book was, and then sometimes I would have to write some sort of a paper where I identify the theme and give examples from within the book about what the theme is. Now, I've mentioned before that I was basically born a writer, and so I have been writing stories and reading tons of books, way before I ever got to this point in my schooling, and I hated reading for school, like just straight across the board. Mostly that was because books basically felt like another fact to memorize and not an actual story that I was reading to enjoy. Not to mention, there was very little in the way of fantasy and probably way more misogyny than was good for me. Not that I actually knew about that at the time. The result is that this educational experience basically made me swear off ever writing anything as fancy as a theme in any of my stories. Oh, I was so cute back then. I don't know if your experience was anything like mine. Maybe you had a better teacher, one who was a little bit more creative or engaging with the content that they were teaching. But maybe you also had your arms crossed and with an affronted glare anytime you had to read a story for school. But with the benefit of time and experience, I came to realize that most of my dislike of theme was just not understanding where it came from. I never learned how theme was created from the point of view of a writer, and thus it just seemed like this unobtainable goal. When it's presented as an unassailable fact, in a book that, let's be honest, was probably pretty decently written in the first place by a white man, then it's like looking at Picasso and assuming that he just started painting with his signature style. That doesn't take into account any of the things that Picasso did before that very distinctive style that you're thinking of. He did a lot of art beforehand that, like, you look at, and as someone who probably doesn't know that much about art, you're not going to look at this and immediately go, oh, that's Picasso, like a lot of his later works, right? And it doesn't take into account all the things that he did to get there, including his influence from Egyptian art and their obsession with the golden ratio. And a lot of their pictures have that distinct, Egyptian style look that you are used to. That is actually an influence of where Picasso got his style. Picasso did not just start painting in that signature way just out of thin air. And in the same way, no theme in a book just pops up out of thin air. But let's pause for a moment. We're going to do an exercise, and this is going to be the first part in identifying themes that go into your story. I'm going to put up 3 prompts in a moment, and I want you to look at these prompts, and I want you to write like a 3 or 4 sentence description of the story that you would write using these prompts. When you're done, you can unpause the video and continue. All right, got that? Perfect. So we're going to set those aside for just now, and we're going to talk about my interpretation of theme. So I like to think of theme as a lens. Everything is written as seen through this lens, and the lens can be more or less focused on whatever the theme is at different times. It's also important to note that while most stories have a theme with a capital T, you can also have little lowercase themes running around in your story as well. So in grand tradition, we're going to pull an example from the movie The Dark Knight, which has been lauded as a pretty amazing movie, and it is in fact a pretty amazing movie with a fairly solid theme, where the uppercase theme was the ethical cost of maintaining a civil society. One of those pretty fancy sounding themes. But the lowercase themes also include order versus chaos, the ethics of the means versus the end, and also what it means to have true heroism. So think about the sacrifices that Bruce Wayne has to make just in order to be Batman, both to his real persona as well as the ethical faux pas that he basically commits by kidnapping somebody from their home country and creating like a surveillance system out of everybody in the city's cell phones. In the movie, these are considered good because it helps him catch the bad guys. Basically, morally, they're no-nos. There's not a thing that we would want to see in any kind of capacity in our actual society. That's part of why the theme hits so hard from that movie, because it doesn't necessarily give you a right or wrong answer. Like, in that movie, it is definitely a good thing because it helps, save the day and all that kind of stuff. But like I said, in a normal society, we would not want any of that stuff to be normal. Now let's look for a moment at how a person's experiences in life will create these lenses that I'm talking about. Imagine for a moment a person who's a misophobe. They see the world through a lens that sees dirt and grime and contamination in far greater focus than what the general population would. And because that's how they see the world, that lens has developed, and so that influences how they would write. Now, this doesn't mean that they're going to write specifically about virology or outbreaks or anything like that. Their themes might involve an enemy that's just naked to the normal eye. There might be some sort of specific ritual that a character has to go through in order to protect themselves from this thing that most people can't even see. Perhaps there's also a focus on the judgment of society for, like, how they are viewed for performing these specific rituals, because they don't understand what danger is there if they can't actually see it, but then the character itself themselves does. Consider for a moment a story about a character who could see malicious ghosts everywhere. Like a misophobe, their actions and precautions might just seem weird to most people, right? Weird and unnecessary, giving them the side eye or all that kind of stuff. But the character knows that they're the only one who can protect against these spirits. I'd say that speaks very well to the lens through which a misophobe actually sees the world. And as an example from my own life, I grew up a tomboy with a younger sister who was much more into the typical feminine pursuits. I ignored makeup, jewelry, clothing unless it was practical, and I did a lot with math and sports and science. And basically my younger years were spent wondering why anyone liked any of that girly stuff. Then I reached my later teens, and even my friends who were kind of tomboy like me started getting more interested in the more feminine things like makeup and dating and all that kind of stuff. And I began wondering why I wasn't female enough, why I was not developing these same interests. Then in my 20s, I finally started to figure out that being a woman is not the checklist that society tries to shove into your face. And then my 30s actually brought the recognition that the things that were considered girly were very specifically considered in a derogatory manner by society, which was mostly male, a society that deemed basically anything feminine as undesirable. And as a result of this, I have developed a lens that looks at everything through this gender norms type of focus. Like everything that I ever wrote, from the loose leaf stories when I was 7 up to the novels that I've finished in my adult years, I somehow play or question with sometimes specifically gender norms, and often, how society's view of people changes who they are, right? Or how it influences who they are. And that eventually developed into what does it mean to be human, or how is a soul developed? I play around with those themes a lot. But very early on, loose leaf stage, even my into my early 20s, all this was very unintentional. I was doing it because this was just the lens through which I was looking at my life, right? It had been developed by my experiences, and I was just writing, but that's how I saw the world. A little later on, I started noticing these themes, and that's when I started doing it intentionally and studying it. The same way that I talked about in my Recognizing Your Voice video about how you already have your own voice and you just have to kind of learn to recognize it. You already have your own lenses, your own ways of looking at the world. Those are just created by every experience that you've ever had. And they shift and change, right? You're growing the lenses and the way that the lenses see things based on all the experiences that you're having. That means that there's already themes in all of your stories. You're just not necessarily noticing what they are yet. And exactly like I mentioned in that voice video, once you can learn how to recognize the themes that are already there, that's when you can start doing it intentionally and modifying and making them stronger. So now we're going to go back to the writing exercise that I had you do earlier. I want you to go ahead and pull that out. I'm going to share with you the responses to those 3 prompts that I gave you, and I actually have my responses to those prompts and then 2 other writers that I know and their responses to the prompts as well. We are going to call those writers A, B, and C. I am writer A. For this first prompt, this was the prompt of dragons have returned to the world. So as you can see here, we have responses A, B, and C. I'm not going to read all of this. You can go ahead and pause so you can read these. And then when you're done, unpause and we will continue on. So on to the second prompt. This is the one where the environment on Earth can no longer support life. And then the third prompt was someone has walked into a coffee shop and is looking directly at you. So you want to notice how different all 3 of these prompts sounded, right? There's probably one or a couple, from the batch that you're like, I would like to read that story. Even though all of those responses came from the same prompts, because it was 3 completely different writers, we all had our different ways of interpreting not only what the prompt meant, but the type of story that we would create based on that prompt. All of these responses are very likely different to the responses that you wrote down when you responded to these prompts. And I will just say, as a quick aside, this is one of the reasons why, hoarding ideas, there's no reason to hoard ideas, there's no reason to guard your ideas. Different people with the same idea are going to come up with different stories, right? So if any of these prompts, interest you and you really like the idea of the story that you've come up with, even if it was the story that one of these other writers came up with this prompt, go ahead, take it, write the story. I mean, I am not going to be, gatekeeping ideas, right? I like ideas to be out there and free flowing so that everybody has access to all the ideas in the world. Take the 3 prompts that you came up with, or if you really want to, you can take one of the story ideas from one of the other writers, but I want you to do at least 3, one from each prompt. Just to, get a wide variety. But what you're going to do is I'm going to give you a set of 10 questions, and I want you to go into that prompt, that story idea, and I want you to answer those 10 questions. And what that's going to do is it's going to kind of help you notice the recurring themes that are going to happen in your stories. While you're answering these questions, you do want to have an actual answer to the question, but you also want to home in it into why, right? Why did I answer this question a particular way? And the why of your answers is it's going to start showing you the edges of the lenses through which you're looking. Go ahead, I'm going to put those 10 questions up onto the screen. Go ahead and pause, and then take your prompts and answer all 10 questions for each of those. Then when you're done, unpause, and obviously I will continue. Okay, so hopefully you've started to notice some similarities in the types of things you choose, right? This is not in any way you being unimaginative. You tend towards certain ideas because of these lenses that you're looking through, right? I'm going to share the example. Writer A, for the prompt where the dragons have reappeared in the world, my idea is immediately going to interacting with the dragons on a personal level. The story's going to focus on a main character. The main character is going to have direct interaction with the dragons. The story's going to follow along with that character. So the focus of the story is basically going to be on the interaction with the dragons, the wonder of these dragons. The question and the conflict is probably going to have something to do with where the dragons have been or how they came back or, why they went away in the first place, something kind of like that. helping to have them not go away again. Because those are the types of stories I like to write, right? I write very personal stories, and I write very wonder-filled stories, right? I love exploring the magic, exploring the systems or whatever. And you can probably tell from the other two prompts from writers B and C that the dragons are a little bit more distant, right? They're kind of like, they're definitely going to be there. They're definitely going to be in the story. They will probably be interacted with, or whatever. But the stories are focusing more on what's going on in the world around the dragons as opposed to necessarily with the dragons. And I don't know what your prompt was necessarily. I can look at that and see that this is the type of story that I kind of knew I would write. And so hopefully by answering those questions for each of these stories, you'll kind of be like, oh yeah, that is the type of story that I like to write. I very often do X, Y, or Z when I'm writing a story. Most of my stories do X, Y, and Z. And truthfully, if you have other stories that you've written, it just depends on how much you've written as a writer before you've watched this video. Like, you can go back to your other stories and answer these same questions for them, right? Because obviously the more examples you have of your own writing and the types of things that you write, the easier it's going to be to see those similarities. Obviously, I just can't have you write 10 stories in the scope of this video. That would just be silly. It would really help you with identifying your lenses, but it's not really going to be feasible. Figuring out what your lenses are and the themes that you like to put in your story, it is an ongoing process, the same way that identifying your voice and strengthening your voice is. It's basically the same thing as learning to write. You're never going to be there. You're always getting better at it. And it's not an extremely fast process, but this is how you develop your writer's intuition, right? And now that we've gone through all of that, and you're starting to see the edges of your lenses, we're going to get down into the nitty-gritty of this video's writing skill. You have your list of preferences. You have things that you tend to think about in your stories. You have the lenses through which you see the world, at least partially visible to you now. You are now going to throw all of it away. Identifying your theme does not mean that you go into writing your story with an intended theme or expecting an intended theme. And you may be asking, okay, why did we go through all that trouble to learn how to identify our theme if we're not going to use it? The mental skill for this video is basically giving up our attachment to having a specific theme. And it's giving up attachment that we have any control over what theme develops within our stories. Yes, theme is important. Yes, it can tie the story together. Yes, it must be nurtured and developed, but all of that is for later. For me, even with the knowledge of what my lenses are, where I can say, oh yeah, I'm generally going to write something like this, my theme is generally going to be something like this, I don't manipulate any of that on purpose until after I've finished my draft 0, or very, very close to the end of finishing at least my draft 0. So for example, I'm going to give you a real-world example from my work in progress that I am currently working on right now. I have a phrase that shows up when character 1 gets really angry and belligerent, and character 2 responds to them with, what is it that you're so afraid of? This leads to an emotional upheaval in character 1. And then later, chapters later, character 2 is having an angry and belligerent type of response to something that happens, and character 1 comes back and says, what is it that you're so afraid of? This happened naturally while I was writing. I did not plan this. It just was the thing that happened naturally with writing the story, right? This is the type of thing where I look at that and I notice that, and I'm like, okay, that could partially be my theme, my uppercase theme. But right now, I don't know whether or not it is, right? It might turn out to be nothing, just a fun callback, the joy of turning somebody's words back on them, right? And obviously a way to develop these characters' relationships with each other. At this point, because I'm still writing my draft 0, I'm not going to go in and try and add in what's the relationship between fear and anger. I'm not going to try and put that anywhere into the story. I'm not going to try and enhance that, right? Because if the story isn't otherwise focusing on it at this point, if I just go and inject it, then it's going to feel like I just went there and injected it. It might end up being nothing, like I said. and it might turn into the theme. At this point, I don't know. And so what I want to do is just continue writing the story. I have noticed it. I'm going to continue write the story, and maybe in 3 months I'll be able to tell you whether it turned into a theme or not. Right now, I do not know. So your job right now is to go ahead and write your story, right? If you're not currently working on a story, go ahead and start a story. And you're going to torture your characters. You're going to throw them through the ringer in entertaining and satisfying ways. You're going to keep an eye out for any ideas that keep coming back. A phrase that repeats, a choice that your character makes where you're surprised by it and yet it just seems to fit somehow. And that can be your theme pacing outside of your door. But you're not going to open that door yet. You're just going to peek at it through the peephole if you want. You're going to notice it. But you're just going to keep writing. Because you're going to remember from this video that theme is not something that you sit down and decide on, or that you pull out of some sort of classic theme hat. It's a lens that you already have. Your writing is already going to be taking it into account. It's going to be working its way in there. And good or bad, it's going to focus itself on what it needs to. Once you've finally finished your draft, you're going to open your door, and that's when you're going to actually notice what the theme is. That's when you can go in and identify what the theme is. It might be a little haggard and thin, and you can care for it and nurture it, and develop it into a theme that you're going to be proud of. Now, if you want a little bit more insight into recognizing things in your own writing that they're not necessarily obvious, watching the Recognizing Your Voice video would probably be a good place to start. I'm going to link that below. And if you have any questions, you did the exercises, you're not quite understanding it, or if you want to share what you found, go ahead and drop it in the comments. I am more than happy to help you if you haven't quite gotten it yet, or you're not quite sure, like if you're seeing your lenses or not. And genuinely, I would love to see what lenses you do find out that you're writing through. And if you like this video, go ahead and like this video, and I will see you in the next one. Okay, bye-bye.